I'm Wilson Craw. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of Generation Rent. With me are Phil Steele from Octopus Energy and Jamie Thunder from Z2K. Phil will be talking about the energy bill side of things, the aspects of being a renter. Jamie will be talking about the benefit system and how that affects you and what you can afford as a renter. And then I'll be taking you through some tips that we have for how to deal with a rent increase. So we've got an hour ahead of us. We will, I think, get started with Phil, if that's all right. Is that right, or was Jamie? Were you prepped to go first? Okay.
Come on, I can go first.
Let's go with Phil first. Thanks. Take it away, Phil.
Okay, let me make my screen share. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Good. Okay, so my name's Philip Steele. I know in the agenda you have got my full title, which is Future Technologies Evangelist. A bit of a fancy title. That means I look after lots of R&D and innovation, experimental things that we're working on at Octopus. There's all sorts of tech, tariffs, and so on that we're constantly exploring and innovating with. And so I'll cover a few of those in this presentation. And my presentation is probably a mix of tariffs, energy system, how things are changing, and I'll try and draw out of that perhaps what you can do from a renter point of view. If you want to get hold of me directly, that email address, agile@octopus.energy, will reach me. I've given that email address as a publicly accessible email address. It hits our systems, and that means if there's an issue somebody hits me with that I can't necessarily solve, I can get it quickly to some of the experts that can. You'll also find me public on Twitter @AgilePhil. So always contactable and keen to hear any questions and help with any issues. I thought I'd start with a few slides about the energy system and how things are changing, which is why we can do some of the smart tariffs that we've got and things. Normally, when I present this, I ask for a poll or an audience response just to what I'm showing on these graphs, but I won't do that this time around. So the left-hand image of the UK with the 5 grey blobs, if anybody can work it out, maybe Jamie or Dan can jump in, but that is showing nuclear generation, and the size of the circle indicates the amount of energy that those nuclear power stations are capable of producing. The right-hand graph, now I've given you that one as nuclear, gets a bit easier. The right-hand graph is gas generation spread up and down the country. And of course, when I go to this, the north-south split roughly between these two might give away the sort of generation that I'm showing here, as well as the size of the circles compared to the previous. So bottom left, orange, that is solar generation. So this is large-scale solar generation across the UK. And on the right is wind. And the two smaller images of the UK on the right-hand side are planned renewable generation. So there's a huge amount more renewable generation that's going to come onto the grid. Now, what that means is that our energy mix is starting to become much more dependent on renewable generation than gas, nuclear, and coal. Coal is pretty much out of the picture now. I took the screenshot this morning to prepare for today. This is the last week's data, and you can see in the green, the wind. We've had some really good, strong, windy days recently. So you can see the magnitude of the energy generated by wind compared to nuclear in the grey at the bottom. When we haven't got wind, then we have in blue large amounts of gas generation going on, and spot the sunnier days when we've had a nice chunk of solar generation going on as well. We also have imports. You can see this purple. We import from France and the Netherlands as well. So this will be part of the energy system spread into Europe as we're balancing the demand with energy that's coming from Europe as well. And this is going to change, continue to change. We're at about 40% generation from renewable generation, and that's going to change a lot more over the next decade, 2 decades, and so on as we get out to 2050, when we're trying to aim for 100% renewable generation and move away completely from fossil fuels. Interesting, this website that I've got this from, I'll share the link actually in the afterwards as part of the slides. Also has the carbon intensity at the bottom here. So carbon intensity is an indication of how green is this energy. We know there's a large amount of wind there, you'll see there the scale is grams of carbon dioxide emitted per kilowatt hour generated. So here in the middle, lots of gas generation, and we're up about 250 grams for each kilowatt hour of electricity generated, and that's the mix across all of these. Interesting fact, coal, when it's on the grid, is about 600 or 700 grams of CO2 emitted for each kilowatt hour. So that's why wind generation, solar generation makes so much difference, and why we're driving towards renewable grid. The energy system is changing. We are moving towards that renewable world, but at the same time, that allows us to do things with smart tariffs, and that requires smart meters. Smart meters have been in the process rollout for a couple of years, three or more years now. There's 28.5 million smart meters. That's a mixture of gas and electricity meters. About 15,000 are being installed per day. We're past now half the UK population, UK homes having smart meters, and that's really important for us to be able to offer smart tariffs. Some of you might be familiar with these. So everything from our Agile tariff, our export tariff, Outgoing Octopus, Cozy, focused on air source heat pumps, Go for electric car drivers, Flux with solar battery systems, and Intelligent Octopus, which now also has Intelligent Octopus Go and Intelligent Octopus Cozy, where we're controlling appliances according to how green the grid is. And then our fan club service as well. So customers within location 2 of our or 3 of our wind turbines are getting a 20 or 50% discount when there is strong wind being generated locally. And so as we go towards that renewable world, we'll see more of these sorts of smart tariffs connecting to that low cost renewable energy. Now, in terms of bills and paying and thinking about how you can save energy and things, I'm going to turn to that next in my presentation. This tool here is something called Balance Forecast. It's very tempting through the summer when you haven't got heating, there's less lighting going on and so on, to perhaps underpay direct debit payments or not build up a credit to be able to get through the winter. So we built a tool a year ago now called the Balance Forecast tool. And what this is showing in pink is a customer here paying a steady 87.85 every month direct debit payment into their energy statement. And the blue line indicates whether this customer is in credit above 0 or whether they're in debt to us below 0. And the electric purple bars below are showing the charges that have been applied in each month. So obviously higher charges through the winter months, November, December, January, February. And using the tool, you can adjust the forecasted direct debit payment that you want to make in order to get this zigzaggy line trying to swing roughly around 0. And if you overpay, it'll be high. If you're paying below, it'll be taking you too far into debt. So as a tool, it's one way of saying, what should I be paying on an even amount? Because it's so much easier to manage a budget if you've got a continuous direct debit pay for your energy right the way through the year. I'm not getting into heavy debt. So that's one of the tools that we launched about a year ago, and it's proving very popular. Again, another activity we launched a year ago was saving sessions. Using rewards point system to effectively get rewarded for using less energy at peak times. So what I showed on that graph was actually cumulative energy generation across the grid, but there's also the demand element to that as well. And we typically use a lot more energy between 4 and 7, and that's the peak period. That's when the cost of energy is higher, the grid tends to be dirty, using more gas generation, and we want to encourage you to try and use less energy between that period. So saving sessions is a reward system that'll be returning in another few weeks to give you better credits and so on for reducing the energy demand during that peak period. We've done other schemes, Power Hour and Big Dirty Turn Down and Big Dirty Turn Up. And we're constantly looking at ways we can engage with using energy at the best times of day and more efficiently. In terms of other tools and services on our website for saving energy, I've gone through payment levels with the Balance Forecast tool, seeing how that works, playing with that tool. There's a lot of information on our website about all the different tariff options. So I've covered some of the smart tariffs there. Some of those are particular to technology. So Cozy with SLC Pumps Go with electric cars, Intelligent Octopus is electric car focused, Flux is focused on battery storage systems. But we've also got the Agile tariff, which varies according to the wholesale market. It's priced per half hour and so on. And the team are always available to support in any way with advice on the best tariff options. There's a whole series of blogs on our website about ways of saving up to £400 through energy efficiency tips. And there's lots of support from us, such as our Opt2Assist and various other government schemes and things for saving energy. I just grabbed one screenshot, for example, here, the Opt2Assist fund, what we're doing with energy prices since the last rises in July, the government support that's available as well. So I really recommend going through the blog pages and looking at all of those resources and things. And really, those are the main points that I kind of wanted to cover, and then help us answer any questions, or of course you can contact me directly with the details I gave at the beginning of the presentation as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Phil. That's really interesting and interesting to see the fact that we've got so many sources of energy. Obviously, at certain times that it can be greener than others. We will have an opportunity to ask questions on energy later on, but next up, I'd like to invite Jamie to give his presentation.
Thank you, Dan. My first task is to successfully, hopefully, share my screen. So if you bear with me as I do that and start the slideshow. There we go. That should. There we go. Could someone confirm that that is showing something like it ought to be? Thank you very much. So yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much to Generation Rent for inviting me to speak to you all. For those of you who don't know the organisation I'm here from, Z2K is an anti-poverty charity that's based in London, and we work directly with clients to help them resolve issues that they have with benefits and housing, and we use the insights that come from that casework to campaign for local and national change. I've been given the task today of talking about the benefit system and how it affects people renting privately. I've not got all the time in the world, so I will go relatively quickly through these slides, but they will be sent around afterwards. I'll also suggest a few ways that you might be able to either increase the money that you've got coming in or reduce what's going out, all of which obviously make it easier to keep up with the rent, as well as what you can do if you are already having trouble or indeed you are behind with the rent. There aren't any silver bullets, I'm afraid, but hopefully a few useful ideas. There we go. It's just a bit about Z2K. So the support that's already been announced or delivered for this year or early next year, there's not as much as there was last year. There will be a total of £900 for those of us receiving means tested benefits, and that in isolation is more than was delivered last year, which I think was 650, and an additional 150. Oh yes, that 900 has been paid in 3 tranches, one that's already been paid and one about to be paid and one to be paid on a yet to be announced date in spring. There's been £150 to anybody who receives disability benefits, such as PIP, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. There isn't a plan currently to repeat last year's £400 sort of global energy bill discount. I think wait and see what happens in the autumn statement around that. There has been some noise around that, so there may be some form of announcement there, and that is on the 22nd of November, so one to stick in your diaries. There we go. But there's also other support that you're entitled to, and if keeping up with your rent is a challenge, then it's worth seeing if any of these apply. The first thing I'll mention is universal credit. And one of the really important things about universal credit is that there isn't any sort of hard upper earnings limit. It depends on, it starts by working out your sort of underlying entitlement, and then it takes off a certain amount for each pound of earnings that you have. So it really depends what that underlying amount starts as. So if you've got less than £16,000 in savings, whether you're single or in a couple, it's worth a quick check to see if you're entitled to anything. And it can also help you with other things as well. So it can it's a passport to things like free school meals or support with NHS costs and dentist costs and prescriptions and those sorts of things. The other benefit, the other sort of main benefit I want to mention here is PIP, or personal independence payment. And this is basically if you have a health condition, whether mental, physical, both, other, that affects you day to day, then it's possible that you'd be entitled to personal independence payment. This isn't means tested. It doesn't matter how much you earn, what savings you've got, what have you. It's simply based on your health and the impact of your health on your life. And it can make quite a big difference. It can also have some other effects, like taking you out of the benefit cap. It can help with things like blue badge applications. It does take a couple of months for an application to be processed, so it's not a quick fix. And if you are turned down, if you apply and you think you have got a good case, it is definitely worth challenging that decision, because quite a lot of people, this is something we see all the time in our casework, are turned down and eventually win at the tribunal. Which is it sounds very formal. It is an office room with 3 people sat behind a table looking at the case. It's not particularly intimidating to be there, so definitely worth applying for that if you think it's something that you might be eligible for. And if you're turned down, then definitely do challenge it, because you cannot take it for granted that they've got the decision right, frankly. So the next then there's also council tax support. Now that's unique to each council, sets their own scheme, but that is for if you're on a low income, and that can reduce your council tax bill, often by taking a percentage off your initial liability. So that's a reduction in your bill, not money directly in your pocket, but it can help to free up a bit of your budget. The other 3 benefits that I'm going to list here are a little bit more niche, so I won't go into too much detail about them. One thing I would say is that if you're currently getting ESA, or employment and support allowance, it's definitely worth checking that you have been getting everything that you should have within that, all the right components of it. And the best way to do that is to speak to a benefits advisor, but rather a lot of people find that they have been underpaid for quite a long time, and then that comes back in once the department works this out or accepts this, then it comes back to you in what can be quite a large lump sum if it's been over several years that you've not been paid that. There we go. So that's some ways that you might be able to increase what you've got coming in, and obviously where it's possible, reducing your spending can help you afford your rent as well. Usually I would have something in here about switching energy provider, but at the moment we're still in a world where that it doesn't deliver particularly large savings. There are things that you can look at switching though, so particularly broadband, mobile phone tariffs. If you're getting certain means tested benefits like universal credit, you might also be able to get social tariffs for your broadband in particular, which is definitely worth a look, because that can take a fair amount off. Similarly, if you're getting certain benefits, you can get reductions on your water bill, or if you have a water meter and either a large family or health conditions that mean you use a lot of water, maybe you need to take more showers than often, or wash your clothes more often, those sorts of things. Water companies typically have a scheme there that can also reduce your bill, or set a maximum it can get to, so that you're not being hard done by the fact you've got a water meter and a good reason to use lots of water. I mentioned council tax support earlier. In addition to that, and this is a sort of one weird thing councils hate, but they do have a legal power to reduce council tax arrears if you demonstrably have no way to pay those. And sometimes that can also reduce your current year's bill. It is at their discretion. It's not guaranteed, but there's no harm in applying. You can some councils have better or worse information on their website about this. It's usually under something called discretionary council tax support. It can sometimes be Section 13A, which is the part of the Local Government Finance Act it relates to. Some councils, like my own council where I live, really make it look a lot like they have a limited fund that they can give out, a bit like discretionary housing payments. They don't. This is a general, wide-ranging power that they have. They don't like to use it because they have to write it off and it looks bad in their accounts and so on. But they have it is not a limited fund. So I would probably suggest looking for something around Section 13A, and places like Money Saving Expert have got quite good guides about that. And yeah, if it's just something that you just can't pay, then that's definitely worth looking into. I used to be a debt advisor before I joined Z2K, and I had lots of success with that, with a council that even if you had no income at all, you had to pay more than a quarter of your council tax bill. In practice, meant a lot of people didn't pay that and just wrapped that up as debt, and that was a very common way to get that debt written off, which is fairly helpful, and it doesn't affect your credit rating either. And finally, it's on this slide, it's a good idea as well to just keep a track of your spending in case of things that you didn't realize were adding up so much. Personally, I'm constantly juggling the various 1 month TV subscriptions that we've got, but depending on what we're watching at the moment, and that can add up to a good sort of 20 quid a month that's not necessary if there's nothing we're watching on Netflix this month. And instead we just want to keep the Now TV one. That's a thing that I don't do as well as I should, but it can be quite a useful one. So hopefully, most of these are useful tips, whether or not you're currently behind with your rent. But if that does happen, the things that it's a good idea to look at, the first is to talk to your landlord, which might quite understandably be the very last thing you want to do. But if you're getting behind with your rent, they're going to know that anyway, and because they're going to see that you're not making up the full rent. So it's better that they know what's going on than that they just suddenly get less than they were expecting. I mentioned discretionary housing payments earlier. The councils have money they can use to help with rent arrears and some other types of housing costs, called a discretionary housing payment. This is a limited pot of money, and as a result, councils are, again, it's not uncommon to be rejected for that. Councils will often also want to show that that you've got sort of a plan for keeping up with the rent in the future, because they don't want to give money out of this limited pot to only for you to be evicted and perhaps need to speak to them again in the future. There's also charitable funds that can be really helpful. There are loads of these, but they usually only offer support to particular groups of people, like people who've worked in a particular profession or industry. Councils can also offer general sort of financial support through their local welfare assistance schemes, although those amounts are normally pretty low. And if the reason that you're struggling with the rent, at least in part, is other debt repayments that you're keeping up with, it's definitely worth getting free independent debt advice. But do get free and independent debt advice. If you just Google help with debt, you'll probably be pushed what's called an IVA, an individual voluntary arrangement, which particularly if you're renting, is just not a good solution. So make sure it's a charity or very sort of reputable organization to do that. And if things get really serious and you need specialist help, there are organizations that can give free advice. I've listed and linked to different types of organization on this slide, and they might either be able to help you find a way to stay in the property or give you advice about what to do if you can't. And finally, if you're in London and receiving a means tested benefit, then please feel free to contact Z2K and we will see what we can do as well. That's me. I will stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jamie. That was really good, really interesting, and hopefully that was very useful for people watching. I suppose I have a lot of questions which I'll come to later, but yeah, if you do have any questions for Jamie, then please put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them later. I'm just going to set up my slides. I'm going to take you through some of our tips for what to do when your landlord asks you for a higher rent. So just bear with me. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So this is obviously probably a much bigger issue for renters this year. It certainly was last year. We've seen rents going up on new tenancies since 2021, and then certainly last year we saw a big increase in people reporting a rent increase from their landlord, because it's very easy for landlords to ask you for a higher rent, but it's not the end of the world. So there are things you can do. One thing to start off with is knowing when your landlord can raise the rent. So the first, what your landlord's probably hoping for is for you to agree to it. So sometimes that might be in your tenancy agreement at the very start of your tenancy. So sometimes it will say that for the first year the rent will go up by a certain amount or by a certain percentage. But if you're on a 12-month contract, that might not always last. What tends to happen in the private rent sector, or at least maybe this might be changed because there are more longer-term tenancies being signed, but signing a new fixed-term agreement at the end of your fixed term and subsequent fixed terms, that's an opportunity for your landlord to basically get you to agree to a new rent. So sometimes that's the opportunity that they get. Sometimes you don't even need to sign an agreement to technically agree to paying a higher rent. So if you start paying it, that will normally be considered by the landlord to be you agreeing to a new rent. If you don't agree, the land and you are outside the fixed term, the landlord could serve a Section 13 notice. That's a sort of formal way of raising the rent without having you as the tenant agree to that. And then the final way that they can raise the rent is after you move out. Now that obviously could be after they have evicted you, or it could be you moving out in order to get a cheaper rent. So I think the point here is that a landlord can't simply say, I'm raising the rent. If they do, then you should think about what your negotiating position is. And there are a few things that work in your favor as a tenant. So you can argue to your landlord that you've been a reliable tenant. They might be taking a big risk if they raise the rent by so much that you can't afford it. You move out, they'll get someone in, they'll have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get someone new in. There's another question of, can you actually afford it? You might tell your landlord, well, if I start paying this higher rent, I just won't be able to keep paying it. I might get into debt, and that'll be a problem for your landlord. So that's potentially appealing to their kind of nature. it's always worth looking at what similar homes are being advertised for in the local area. If your landlord wants £1,200 for your house, but then you see a property down the road it's very similar, being advertised for £1,100, then potentially you could go and rent that property, and that landlord would have to advertise your home for on the same market. So potentially there's a way that you can take that evidence and tell your landlord that they're asking for too much based on the local market. Now I should say that this is a less likely situation right now, because rents have been going up so quickly, and lots of landlords are putting up the rent by a lot because they know that they could get a higher rent if they just advertised it. So it's a pretty grim situation in that regard. Another thing that you should bear in mind is whether there are any issues with your home that mean that the landlord shouldn't be getting this rent that they're asking for. Have they been ignoring problems? Should they be improving the property? That there are certain things you could go back to the landlord and say, look, I will pay this higher rent if you fix this leak in the roof, etc. Now they should be doing that already, of course, but that's just one way that you can push back against that. Obviously, it all comes back down to the question of, can you afford it? The final thing to think about is whether the letting agent is pushing your landlord into this and basically encouraging them to raise the rent beyond what they ought to be. Letting agents will get a higher commission from the rent if the rent is put up. Now, personally, I once had a situation where the letting agent emailed me to say the landlord wants to put the rent up. I actually had the landlord's number. I gave the landlord a call. It turned out the letting agent had told him that this was what he should be asking for, and he was actually fine with a lower rent, at least a lower rent increase than the letting agent was asking for. So it's always worth knowing what your landlord's contact details are, so you can go to them directly without having to deal with the letting agent, or even kind of trying to divide them and get a better deal that way. Now, you can put all these reasons to the landlord, and then the landlord will come back and say whether they want to go ahead with the rent increase. Maybe they'll say, okay, what are you willing to pay? And then if you can reach a figure that you both are comfortable with, then make sure you agree it in writing. Sometimes the landlord will say, okay, well, I'm not going to lower the amount I want to charge you. So they have a couple of options there. They could either serve a Section 13 notice, as I mentioned before. So this is the formal notice that they need to serve if they can't get you to agree to a higher rent. Now, that can be then challenged at a tribunal, which I'll come on to in a moment. Another alternative they have is serving a Section 21 eviction notice, and that's basically their way of essentially threatening you to pay a higher rent, or otherwise you have to find a new place to live. Sometimes they'll even do that when they say they're raising rent, as a preemptive move, which is ultimately one of the reasons why we want Section 21 abolished, because it does allow landlords to bully tenants like this. If you do get a Section 21 though, you should be aware that it could be invalid. So if your deposit's not protected, if the letting agent or landlord has charged you a banned fee, which is most fees, if you weren't, there are various documents that your landlord needs to provide: gas safety certificate, energy performance certificate, and a how to rent guide. If any of those is missing, then it's likely your Section 21 notice is invalid. You're also protected if the council's inspected the property and said it's actually unsafe to live in, and served the landlord with an improvement notice. that lasts for 6 months, so it's not a permanent protection. And then finally, if the home isn't licensed properly, so this is most common in houses in multiple occupation, so shared houses. But those are the most commonly in need of a license in the first place. But you're protected if your landlord doesn't have a license. A few things to say about the first tier tribunal. So one interesting thing about this is that decisions are published online, so you can look into what tenants have done before, where what kind of evidence you need to challenge a rent at the tribunal. You should be aware that the tribunal will determine the rent based on what the market rent is. So if as has happened in the past couple of years, if market rents have increased faster than wages have, then it's very likely that what they set will be unaffordable. But the good thing about it is that it does the tribunal does consider the quality of the home. So if your landlord has failed to make repairs, then that will be taken into account. They'll probably knock a chunk off the rent. And then similarly, if you've made improvements to the home, you won't have to pay a higher rent because of the improvements you've made. What they can do is, if the landlord asks for £100 rent increase and you challenge that, it's still possible that the tribunal could award a £200 per month increase, which is just makes it a lot riskier to take this approach. Another risk is that, again, the landlord could serve a Section 21 notice as well. So another thing to bear in mind is that if you challenge it and the rent is increased, it could be backdated to before the decision. So you may have to pay an increased rent sort of going back in time, which although not from before the notice was served, but the date on the notice. Sometimes that you can appeal that, and that's worth being aware of. So this is the final slide we're going to have. We've got 20 or so minutes of questions. I will actually I'll start looking at the Q&A, but I will hang on. I'll pull it up a little bit later, actually. So thank you for listening to that. I hope that was helpful. I see we've got a few questions, so I'll take a look now. In fact, one thing I'll do is I'll ask Phil and Jamie a couple of questions based on their presentations to kick us off, if that's all right. Phil, can I come to you first? One thing that I was interested to know is, well, Jamie actually mentioned this, the question of switching supplier. Obviously, you work for Octopus, so you might say, yes, you should switch to Octopus, but is there a argument for having for renters or anyone to look into switching supplier? Is it worth it, or at most is the best deal currently to go with what's on the what the kind of the nationally set cap is?
You should always look. You should always consider switching. You don't know what tariffs have been doing for the past year with other energy suppliers. It has been hard to switch recently because of the energy price guarantee and the energy prices that we've gone through. But always shop around. There's always some interesting tariffs that each of the energy suppliers are offering as we go into this kind of much more renewable world. Some of the stuff that I was talking about, like the Fan Club and the agile tariffs and things, there's some significant savings being made from those if you can take advantage of those and to see what the other energy suppliers are doing. Always do it. I was going to comment as well, actually, Dan, if I can. Just one other
Yeah.
point I wanted to make, actually. When you're talking about the rental increases and things, we should also note that rental properties must have an EPC rating of E or high, I think it's E or higher, and that's going to change in the next year or two as well. So that encourages landlords to ensure they've got decent levels of insulation, double glazed windows, and so on. So that's something else in the tool bag of rent negotiation.
Yeah, that's true. The fact that it's an E, E is the minimum it can be. One thing that we've actually heard in the past few weeks actually is that the government has decided to abandon the increases in minimum standards. So it's not. It was going to be C from a few years' time, but the government decided to scrap that incorrectly.
That would have been so important. That's really bad.
Yeah, it would have been very. It would have been absolutely essential. Well, it is still actually essential to reduce bills. I suppose there's a question here. I'll just read it out from someone in the who's watching. Would it be helpful for renters with different landlords for charging points for electric vehicles and bikes in the area of the rented property to be installed? The question has said that he understands there have been fires in homes when bikes were charged in them. But it's an issue I think it is going to become more important as we have more electric vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, it's likely with electric bikes, you could be charging at a rate of like 3 kilowatts. A kettle is rated about 2 to 2.5 kilowatts. So starting to draw 3 kilowatts on a 13 amp mains plug is dangerous. It is going to get hot. It's not designed to be drawing that kind of continuous amount of energy. I'm not sure what the correct method is for charging e-bikes. I mean, electric car chargers, certainly you have to have the correct electric vehicle charger. In fact, all chargers that are installed now have to be what's referred to as smart chargers. So they have to avoid by default charging between 4 and 7 in the evening, and you can apply settings to them. There's also other safety requirements. So there's something called I think it's pen testing, and it's related to earthing between the vehicle and the house. You should not charge an electric car off what's called a granny charger, which is a 13-pin plug connected to your car. But yeah, with back on that question of electric bikes and charging them inside the house, bad idea. Need external chargers for these sorts of things to avoid that risk of fire.
Right.
In terms of rent, though, rental properties, again, you'd have to go to your landlord to have a charge of some sort put on the outside of the property. I'm not sure if you'd be allowed to install it yourself necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think we quite have the legal framework to allow that just yet. I suppose a question for both of you, which both of you may know the answer to. Jamie mentioned actually, just on the £900 extra support for people on means tested benefits. So that's up on 22, the winter of 22-23. I guess a question I have, we had the £400 for every household. We also had an additional cap essentially on the tariff, which we don't have this year. Is there anything either of you can say about how the average household might experience this winter based on, in comparison to last year? So, we had quite high energy bills, but every month we had people who were on direct debit were getting knocked off, having a chunk of that knocked off by the £400. How does it compare to this year?
I think it will vary depending on which of those you were entitled to last year and which you're entitled to this year, there are definitely people who are going to get quite a lot less support this year than last year. I think I'm right in saying that the current energy price cap is below the level of the energy price guarantee last year. So even if that was still in place, it wouldn't be biting. It wouldn't be being used at the moment. If you're getting means tested benefits, you'll get more money sent from DWP into your bank. However, you won't be getting, as it stands, that £400 and 650 from last year plus 400 energy bill discount equals more than 900. So so I think there are going to be a lot of people who are, and of course anyone who's not getting means tested benefits will be getting less support. I haven't done, because there won't be any effectively. I have to say I haven't done the maths about how the decrease in energy costs, how much that balances it out. I don't know if Phil has thoughts on that.
No, sorry, no, I haven't got any other insight onto that. But I mean, do use the balance forecast tool that we've made available to anyone on our regular tariffs, so your flexible and flat rate tariffs. Use that and keep an eye on the news for the next announcements and statements. Yes,
the other thing that's certainly getting talked about a lot at the moment is a social tariff for energy, which doesn't currently exist. And there's a bit of a movement behind that, which would effectively be some form of discount on your energy bills, if you receive means tested benefits or just have an income below a certain amount. Again, that doesn't exist currently. It won't come in. I wouldn't expect it to come in instantly. But that is something that is worth looking out for in the autumn statement as well. Right. Dan, there were a couple of questions directed to me in the Q&A. Is it worth me rattling through those?
Yes, I've got one up in front of me. I can read that out for you, and you can take that. One member of the audience says, "I understand DHPs, that's discretionary housing payments, are limited, but I will probably need to apply for it in my next tenancy starting in December because of the significant increase in rents. I already received the maximum universal credit housing element."
Yeah, so that's not sort of a bar to you applying for one. How DHPs typically work is they're typically you're awarded some amount of support, which can be the gap between your local housing allowance and your rent, for a period of time, 6 months perhaps, with the idea being that you look for somewhere that a more sustainable tenancy in that time, because as I say, the council has a limited pot of money there. Now, the other thing I'm very aware of is the lack of properties within LHA levels as well. So I'm not pretending that's an easy thing or a particularly helpful rider for a council to put on a DHP award. But yeah, there's no reason that you shouldn't make that application just yet. Do be aware it is discretionary. And one thing I should have said is there's no formal, because it's discretionary, there's no formal right to challenge or appeal a decision. You can ask them to look at it again, which is very much, it's at their own discretion. But if you can provide additional information, or if you do think it's just an absurd decision, there's no harm in asking them to look at it again. But it does remain at their discretion. There is no formal route to challenge that. There was also a question around pension credit that that John Morris put in the chat. And yes, so I mentioned there being a £16,000 limit on savings you can have to get universal credit, and that doesn't apply to pension credit. Pension credit works differently. Actually, as you have savings, it tapers off. So it's more like how income affects your universal credit. So for pension credit, it works differently. And yeah, you're quite right, John. That doesn't you can have more than £16,000 every £500 you have over so you have £10,000 of savings is just completely discarded, is not taken into account. Then every £500 above that will take £1 off your weekly pension credit award. And so eventually, at some point, depending on what that original award was, that will end up at zero, but there's no point at which it just cuts off.
Great, thanks. I've just got a question about DHPs, actually. Are you able to, do you have any insight onto what the chances of success are?
Yeah, good question. I can't give you a percentage. And that's it partly depends on how much of their pot a council has used up already. If you're councils do this differently, but if you're applying in March, it may be there's simply no money in that pot and they are legally restricted on how much. So they get given an amount by central government. They are then allowed to top that up by a certain amount further. Councils' budgets are incredibly tight anyway, so they often don't top that up by as much as they possibly could. In terms of sort of tips and tricks for DHPs, as I say, demonstrating that you are likely to be able to keep up with the rent in the future, or that there are sort of irons in the fire for doing that is a useful thing. If it's just extremely clear that the tenancy is not affordable and you're getting all the benefits, you don't have any applications in waiting decision, you're not able to work or not likely to be bringing in much more money through work, then the best you might get is a few months of support, but with the idea that you look for a new tenancy. There's nothing to stop you applying again for a DHP if you've had one, but again, that might signal to the council that isn't something that you're going to be able to sustain in the long term.
Would people be encouraged then to, if the rent was unsustainable, to apply for money to help them, to cover the deposit on a new tenancy?
Yes, so that's one thing that a DHP can help with is moving costs. So you can ask for that. My experience of them has typically been using them to help with rent arrears or shortfalls between LHA and rent in particular. I've just seen someone asked in the chat whether they're a lump sum payment. So the way it normally works is, so they might say, the council might say, we will pay you basically this amount per week over this period. Now, some of that period will be before that decision, in which case you'll just get it in a lump sum. It's sort of a backdated payment. The rest they would pay into your account probably monthly for the remainder of it. So it goes to you, and then you need to arrange to get that to the landlord.
Great. Thanks. Just having a look at the other questions that come up. So I suppose there's someone has asked about rent increases, so I'll answer this question. Why would a tribunal award a higher rent? I don't understand this. If a tenant is already challenging a higher rent, would obviously put the tenant in a more vulnerable situation, which is absolutely right. So basically, if you've got a rental market where the rent on a new tenancy is, let's say, £1,000, you're currently paying, let's say, £800, but then your landlord has asked for the rent to go up to £900. Let's say you could think that that's too much and unaffordable for you. You can challenge that at a tribunal. The tribunal will take a look at the local market and see that the going rent is £1,000, and then they would say that that's the rent the landlord's allowed to charge, and so that's what they would that's what they would do, and that's how they can the tribunal can raise the rent much further. That's the big risk of going down that route. The Renters Reform Bill is likely to keep that sort of system in place, which there was signs that it might have stopped that happening, but at least under this government, they seem to be keen to keep that system in place, which is not great. There's a question about PIP, but it looks like Jamie's answering that on the chat. Someone's asked, this is a question for Phil. Smart meters were having problems. Have they been sorted?
Yes and no. I mean, smart meters are technically very complex. All of the architecture behind it, how they communicate, data they get from them, and what's called data flows that we use to communicate with them. But there is a scale issue here. There are, as I said, 28.5 million smart meters now out there. So it's inevitable that they are not all going to be absolutely perfect, and there'll be some issues. Typically, issues are usually some sort of connectivity issue, and that's because in the south and the centre of the country, we depend on the Telefonica network, and in the north, it's a radio layer called Arqiva, and so with any radio communication, you're always going to run into some connection coverage issues. So that's usually the most common issue that we see. Which is why on the slides I had an image there which showed the claimed coverage, which was 99.3% is what the smart meter system claims covers. That's 99.3% of the UK population, not landmass. But the fact is, we have hundreds of thousands of customers with meters sending us smart meter data that we bill on every day, every week, every month. If somebody's got an issue, we'll investigate it and see what sort of issue it is.
Right, thanks, Phil. I had one question just about the reducing demand initiative saving sessions. Is that so? You mentioned this is just during peak hours, so it's a 3 or 4 hour window.
Yep.
Is the intention that people run their washing machine, dishwasher, or other kind of high energy appliances
exactly.
outside of those times?
Yes. What we do with the saving sessions is we look at the average consumption you've achieved over several days or a few weeks previously for that time period. We suggest there's going to be a certain amount of credits for reducing the energy demand. We then get the revised data from the smart meter, or the new data from smart meter for that during that period, and then we can work out what the reward is for that. Yes, it's got to be things like washing machine, dishwashers, dryers is where you're going to see the main load. Maybe people who are charging electric vehicles as well, or have got electric and heat, could just turn the heating down a little bit. But we don't want to disclose in the time.
Mm-hmm. Are all suppliers doing this, or is it just some at this stage?
It's a mix because this all fits into what's called the flexibility markets. So most of the energy suppliers are starting to now offer some sort of offers in similar ways to reducing demand at the peak time. And this will just keep increasing because we're going into this kind of world where renewable energy is much more intermittent and variable. There'll be storage, and there will be either payments or credits of some sort for working with the way energy is generated instead of assuming it's there all the time.
Okay. Thanks very much, Phil. Thanks to you, Jamie, as well. It's 7 o'clock now, so we're going to wrap this up. There was one question that came in. When is the rents reform bill likely to be passed in Parliament? See how it has been delayed and maybe subject to amendments. We are trying to amend it, but I think the most important thing at the moment is for it to be debated by MPs. It's not actually been debated yet, even though we've had it for about 5 months now. So there's a small window of opportunity in the next couple of weeks to have that debate, and then the King will open Parliament again, and the whole process will potentially have to start again. But it's worrying that we haven't had it debated yet. What I would encourage anyone watching to do is to email their MP. We have a campaign on our website, which you can probably guess from the slide I've just put up. It's generationrent.org. We've got a campaign section which you can you can find our Renters Reform Bill campaign action on. And just to wrap things up, if you've enjoyed this webinar, or at least found it helpful, then please share it with your friends, anyone who you think would benefit from watching it. If you aren't already on our mailing list, please sign up to get our emails. So we'll tell you more about any more webinars we have coming up and other opportunities to get campaigning. If you've got an experience you'd like to share, renters' experiences are one of the most valuable things we have. It helps us really explain to the media, to politicians, what problems renters are facing. So we have a webpage there. You can also get involved with our research on the Renters Panel. So we have a number of projects where we go out and speak to renters, get your experiences through surveys, through focus groups. Sometimes we even get renters up in front of civil servants in the Department for Housing to really tell the officials directly what your priorities are, how you think a new policy will work or not. You can also become a volunteer and help with our campaigns. And then finally, we always ask for donations. It's probably not the best session to ask for donations, but we do have a prize draw at the moment which you can enter for free. You can enter if you have some money you'd like to donate as well. But it's on crowdfunder.co.uk, and we have a selection of books which we are giving away. And to enter, you can just follow that link there. We'll send these slides out to the people who have who signed up for them. So if you have not written them all down, fear not. That prize draw is running until the end of the week, by the way. Well, can I just say thanks again to Jamie Thunder from Z2K and Phil Steele from Octopus Energy. I hope you found that a very educational experience. I certainly did. I've learned a lot from that. Yeah, thanks again, and thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of Renters' Rights